Hi, welcome back to the shop. Thanks for stopping by. This week we are going to try out the Easy Core coring system by Oneway. Just got this not that long ago, and you can see in the background there's some pretty significant pieces of wood sitting on the floor here. That's butternut, and I'm going to start processing this, so I don't want to waste it. It's hard to get butternut, and there's some really nice big pieces of wood there, and it's a shame to put them into shavings when I can cut some bowls out of them. So what I have here is this is the clamp block, which fits my lathe. I have the 20-inch base set to match the swing on my lathe. Then I've got the 4 knife sets that they sell with this unit. So the 9, the 11.5, 13-inch, and the 16-inch. And there's several of these pieces that I'll be able to get a 20-inch outside bowl, which is the biggest I can turn on my lathe. And then I can core out 9 and 11, 13, and a 16. So I get 5 bowls out of one piece rather than one. So I'm going to unbox this, and we'll take a look at what we got and what we need to do to get it to work. Alright, so the base set comes with an Allen key, a 3/4 inch wrench, which you would use to adjust the finger guides, and a handle. Of course, the plate that mounts to the bottom or sits on top of the bedways in your lathe. The clamp block fits between the bedways on your lathe. This is the right one for mine. So it just comes with the bolt and the clamp block. Put that on later on. It is extremely heavy. That's a 1/2 inch or more thick, that chunk of metal on the bottom. It's very, very well made. First thing you need to do, based on what I've seen on the Oneway website, is I need to take this off and turn it around so that the pointed side is pointing out. And this will sit pointing towards the headstock. So I'm going to take this off and turn it around and bolt it back together. Alright, so I'm only going to show unboxing one of these. That's so nice because they're all the same, just different sizes. So this is the arm and the cutter mount. This is the 16-inch one. So we have one of those. This is the finger guide, which sits underneath of this when you're making your cut, and you'll see that later on in the video how that works. Everything that you need to install the cutter and the cutter itself, and a set of sharpening instructions on how to put that together. You'll notice these come with a set screw in the bottom, and that's pretty important. That is just to gauge the height so that your cutter is exactly at center, and I'll show you how we're going to do that a little later on. Alright, so your mounting block, your clamp block, goes through the slot behind the post that holds the cutter, and the cutter goes to the center of the lathe, and the holder for the finger support goes toward you. And so that just goes down through the top in the slot with the washer on the top. You just turn it sideways, and then just tighten it up with the 3/4 inch wrench that they provide in your bedway. So I'm just going to have this loose for now because I want to move this around. There. Good. So I can slide here, but I'm down good. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to set the cutter, and again, this is down tight enough now that it's not tipping, it's tight. So we're going to slide this back so that the cutter comes to the brad point in my tailstock. And you can see that there's quite a bit of discrepancy between the two. So I'm going to want the tip of this cutter at that height. So I need to take this back out and back off this screw, and the nut's just there to tighten that screw so it doesn't have a chance to move after you get it to place. This will be pretty close, I think. So what I'm looking for here is alignment between the shoulder here, not the tip of the cutter, but the shoulder back here, to be right in line with the tip of that brad that's in the center of my headstock. So I know I'm good right there. So now that I've got that, I'll pull that back out and I'll lock that nut on so it can't move again. So you can see here's the set screw. There's a lock nut that's already up tight now. So I'm just going to tighten that in so that it can't back out and get out of adjustment. So I should never have to touch that again. And I'll probably actually do this again off camera, and I'll Loctite this because I have no intentions of doing this and anything else. Now this seems like it's extended a long way, but the base I assume would be different models for different lathe swings, as it says on the box, but I suspect that these cutters and the finger support are universal ones that work with all of them. So just double check to make sure nothing moved. Well, that's great, just like that. Tighten this up for this part. Okay. finger support is the part that you're going to move often while you're doing work. So we're just going to loosen this off so that it can move. So this needs to be lowered enough so that it sits, it just slides nicely, but it's still being supported by each end of the finger. So that's pretty good right there, actually. Same process, I'll take it back out. This nut back up again. Double check it. All right, so what you want to do then is you want to have this so it's just hitting on this post. It appears that this is made with a little bit of it's tilted up a little bit, so I assume that when it takes pressure, this has a little bit of movement in it maybe, and they've allowed for that. But for now, we're going to make sure that we're good on the post. We'll see how that works. So that hits nicely all the way there. It's well supported. All right, now the next thing I want to do. There's different ways of doing this. I'm going to use a template, and I'll make a template for each one of these. Okay, so what I've done now is I have the base plate set perpendicular to my lathe bed with the square. All right, so it's sitting that way. Now, whether I move this perpendicularly in and out, it's not going to change the distance of this cutter at the bottom of its arc from my chuck jaw. And on a bowl where I'm going to take a 16-inch core, this is a 16-inch cutter. I will only be taking a 16-inch core out of a bowl, obviously, that's bigger than 16 inches. So if I have a 20-inch piece on here, I'm going to want an 1 3/4 inch bottom on it. So I've locked this in. This is locked into place now. I've measured from the face of my chuck, which will be the bottom of my rough cut bowl. I'll have a tenon on it. That'll be extra, but I've got it set so that it's 1 3/4 inch from the face of this chuck to the outside of this cutter. That way, when I'm done cutting this out, when I take a core out of a 20-inch piece, for example, or regardless of what size piece it is to start with, if I'm set here, where this sits right now, I'll always have an 1 3/4 inch at the bottom, plus or minus a little bit of play, whatever play is in this, and I'm not sure what that is yet because I haven't used it. So now I'm going to cut a piece of plywood. I'm going to fit it in here, and I will mark that for 16 inches, and I will always have this setting, and I'll be able to slide this ahead because it'll be square. Rule of thumb on these things is about 10%. They say 1/8 of an inch per inch, 1/8 of an inch of wall thickness for every inch of diameter of the bowl. That's a personal preference thing. Sometimes that's a little excessive depending on the wood that you're using. If you're using a wood that isn't going to crack and it's not going to distort too much, then 1 3/4 inch I find is lots. So, all right, I'm going to go make a template for this, and I'm going to make one for every different cutter. Okay, so I've roughed in a piece of wood earlier on, and it's not, I don't need to have the number 4 knife, which is a 16-inch cutter. So I'm going to start out with the one that will do 13. So my blank is 14 3/4. So I'm not sure how well you can see this, but the face on my lathe, the casting on the face of my lathe is not perfectly straight across. So I can show you here. See, it has a bit of an arc to it, and the arc isn't consistent, so it's not symmetrical, which doesn't affect the lathe in any way, but it does affect how this will stop. So in order to make sure that I get the same result every time, I've calculated my distance here so that at the end of my cut on the 16 to 13-inch blank, I'm going to have 1 inch and just a little over 1.5 inches for the bottom depth, and I'll use this jig every time, so I never have to worry about where I land when I start out with a blank that size. So I made a keyway that fits down in my bedway of my lathe, and so it'll fit right in here. So what I'll do is I'll push that in. It'll sit tight up to the headstock, and then I can just loosen this over and tighten it into the lathe or into the bed, and then I know that I'm good every time, and that's my starting point. All right, so hopefully this will make some sense. I got my rough thin blank here now. It's 14 3/4 diameter. I'm going to get 2 cores out of it, I hope. This one's going to be 8 inches, just almost, and this one is going to be 11, pretty close to 11. So I'll have a 14 3/4 rough blank, an 11, and then an 8. What I checked out on this without a blank in here, just measuring to the face of the chuck, of the jaws, the difference between the 1, the 2, and the 2, and the 3, and the 3, and the 4 is 3/4 of an inch. So if I didn't move this at all, and I just changed out the cutter, I would have a 3/4 inch deep bottom, which isn't deep enough for my liking, in each of these blanks, except for the very first one, which I used the template to set it out for 1 5/8 or whatever it was. So I've made this 3/4, and then when I put my template in, I put a spacer down on the bed of the lathe and brought this back an extra 1/2 inch. So I should end up with 1 1/4 thick wall in the bottom between this one and this one when I cut this out. So it's pretty close. So we're going to see how it works out anyway. Got my lathe on the highest torque setting, lowest speed setting is set at 200, actually set at 300 RPM. So I'm just going to give this a go. This is the inaugural run, so hopefully everything stays together for us there. So I'm going to speed this video up here in a little short bit, and I know people don't care for that, but this is actually fairly slow. And this wood is butternut, and butternut is not a great wood to cut green. It actually cuts much harder green than it does dry. And even just roughing in the outside of this with the bowl gouges, which really usually doesn't take very long, it's just stringy. And those strings get caught between the cutting edge and the wood, and you'll see that I'm backing in and out here frequently just to clear that cutter so I can get it to cut it all. So anxious to do another video down the road here where I'm doing a different kind of wood, because I know it'll be a much better representation. These are brand new cutters out of the box, so they are very, very sharp. And actually I stopped wiping these off with my fingers and get a little toothbrush to clean them off because I was concerned that I would get a nick from them. I should say also that this is not meant to be an instructional video by any means. It's just sharing the process that I went through based on videos I've seen and information I've collected from opening the box to getting a couple of cores cut. So I've gotten a ways into the core here now, and I was just running the cutter off the top of the post of the finger guide. So now I'm just loosening that up, and I'm going to slide the finger itself into the cut. And all you do with this is you just put it into the depth of the cut, then back it off a little bit, like 1/4 inch or so, and make sure that you have clearance on both sides. And I didn't realize, but my cutter is actually blocking the view of this. So all you do is just, like I say, put it into the depth of the cut, back it out about 1/4 inch, and make sure that you got some play side to side so that it's not hitting. Then you give it a spin freehand to make sure that nothing's touching, and away you go again. And you have to do this fairly often throughout the cut. You want to keep that cutter supported all the way through the cut. So one of the things I found was a bit of a learning curve is how much pressure you should put on this. Now again, this is different wood than normal, but I found that I was giving it a little bit too much at the start, then having to back off, and I found as I got going on, a nice, easy, smooth pressure inward works much better. This first core kind of popped out on me unexpectedly. I had about 1 1/4 inch left to cut, and when I checked it previously, it wasn't even loose yet. So beauty of this is, I guess it is low RPM, and there's a cutter there, so there's not much chance of it to come out and get you. Did a little playing around, and I kind of found that it cut the best, although it's not a great cut in this green butternut, at about 500 RPM. So I kind of stuck with that. Okay, so I've got this set up now for the number 2 cutter, and so when I cut this out, if the calculations were correct with the spacing, I should have 1 1/4 inch thick base on this one. I did adjust the height a little bit. I brought it up. I think it's supposed to be set to the center of the cutter rather than to the shoulder. So we'll see if that makes any difference here. So while I'm cutting out this last core, I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a rundown on the value of this thing. This was not given to me. It's not a tool review. I actually paid for it. Taxes in Canada, I paid $1,235.10 for the entire system, all 4 cutters, the block, and the base set. So the first core that I cut out would be a $40 to a $50 finished bowl. The core that I'm cutting out here right now would be somewhere between $110 and $130. You know, so if I do that 8 or 9 times, I've got my money back out of that. And that's just in regular wood. If I was doing burls, which are much higher value, or burl resin hybrid combinations, you get your money back much more quickly. So well worth it, I think. Okay. So that looks just about right. So that was a very poor shake for this cutter. I know they're brand new cutters and they're sharp, but again, green butternut does not cut good. Even cutting it with the chisels to roughen the outside, it's stringy, really stringy. So I'm anxious to see how this works in a piece of maple or birch and on burls especially. So yeah, so I'm going to measure the thickness of this bottom. I've got a little extra here. I've got a little extra where there's a little sort of tenon where it broke off on the inside, and I've got that little bit left in the bottom, but I'm curious. Well, that actually came out really good. I kind of turned it in a half sphere because I knew it was going to cut a semicircle out of it. So that actually is pretty good. I can take this off now and it's ready to put up to dry. There we go. So on top of that little tenon, partially on it, I'm 1.5 inches. So I'm pretty close to what I thought it would be. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Again, I'm really excited to use this on some different wood. This is terrible, but green wood normally cuts really easily. This one is one of the exceptions. So even though the cutting on that was a little harder than I expected, I'm going to have a 7 1/4, well that's almost 7.5 inch bowl, and it is about 3.5 inches deep, 3 inches deep. So there's one. This one is 11 inches in diameter, and it is going to be very close to, well, this will probably finish up at about 4.5 inches. This one is almost 7, but I take off the tenon, it'll be 6 1/4 deep, and it is 14 3/4 across. So time well spent, really. And if you're still with me, thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone who subscribes to the channel and watches the videos. I appreciate that a ton as well. If you like what you saw and you hadn't subscribed, please consider doing so. That would be excellent. We'll see you next time.